As human beings, we really enjoy having a sense of agency, a sense of control and power and awareness of our lives, a sense that we're actually in charge of our own destinies and our own actions. But in the world like this, it's kind of hard to attain. One of the earliest forms of satisfaction we derive in childhood, beyond our basic care from our mothers and our parents, is the first time that we start to gain command of our faculties. Hey, I can move my arm and I can reach out and grab an object. Oh, I can actually move my body and get to this thing that I want to be able to get to. I can actually create something that I can think in my mind and I can make it happen in the real world. This is fundamentally satisfying to us as human beings. We're agentic forms. We enjoy our sense of industry and utility and our abilities to create things that we think up and ability to influence the world. As we gain adulthood, we learn more about the world. Our faculties get better. We're more able to exercise our control over the environment and more able to understand better about the world in which we live and the environment that we happen to find ourselves in any given moment. We derive satisfaction just from being aware and being able to influence our immediate surroundings. But this is not always necessarily possible. We are often in situations where we're either not aware fully of what's going on, there is some uncertainty, and possibly we don't even have any control over the situation that we happen to find ourselves in, or even the larger situation beyond that. This can be very uncomfortable. In fact, it's the source of, I would say, a lot of the anxiety that many of us experience on a daily basis. I know this is the root of a lot of my anxiety as well. There are things that are just, frankly, outside my control. I have no way of really influencing politics outside my door. I have no way of, changing the weather, that's for sure, but in a larger sense, I have no way to influence the climate catastrophe that's currently underway. I don't have a way to exert control over the rainforest being cut down and burned. There's very little actual agency that I have in the grander scheme of things. And even in my own life, I only have a certain amount of control over what it's possible for me to do. I have limited resources, limited amount of income, and so I can't exactly just afford to go on a trip or buy a thing that would be necessary to be able to achieve a dream or a goal that I might have. Sure, there are ways to work around that, and there's also achievable and functional goals that I have that don't require any of these resources, but even still, there is this inertia, this thing that's holding me back. On an individual level, this can manifest in many different ways. This anxiety can come out as frustration, as anger, as a desire to exert control over one's environment. This can be in an extremely inappropriate fashion. It can be browbeating people, steamrolling them as they're trying to exercise their own agency in their own lives. This can manifest as well in terms of compulsions. The compulsion to keep an exceedingly clean house, the compulsion to have perfection in everything that you do, a compulsion to know things that you can't know. And when you run into a compulsion to be aware of something that you literally cannot know, this can lead to an even worse neurosis. The will to knowledge is a natural part of being a human being. We want to know things, we want to be aware. But when that information isn't available, it can be very tempting sometimes to think that we know, even if we don't know. This can sometimes result in making things up, or believing someone else who's made something up. If it sounds convincing, if it sounds confident, it can override that somewhat awareness of uncertainty with this sense of confidence. If someone tells you a conspiracy theory or some wild fantasy about some political rival that is responsible for this unpleasant uncertainty in your life, it would be very tempting to believe it because, that's a simple answer. It's a clear way of understanding a situation that's just too complex to know better. The will to knowledge is sometimes replaced with a will to certainty. We give up on the drive to know more, and we become satisfied with this certainty in the knowledge that we have already, whether or not it's actually accurate. This is in large part why politics has gotten so weird in the last few decades. The world is very complicated and getting more complicated every day. Technology alone has just exploded in terms of its influence on our culture, on our politics, on our daily lives. And for that matter, we as average citizens don't really have all that much knowledge as to what's going on in our governments, and especially not in our economic sphere, and even in our own communities a lot of the time. This discomfort can cause us to replace what is an extremely complicated system with, in our minds, a very simple system. Something that has clear-cut rules about what's good and what's bad, what's evil, who your enemy is. And of course, this can lead us into some very poor decision-making. What we witnessed recently in the United States is a manifestation of this. There's been this uprising of various conspiracy theory groups, such as QAnon, which they've replaced this complex system of international relations and economic, not exactly cooperation, but collusion, that is effectively running our world with this simple system of evil people doing evil things evilly. This evil guy theory of world politics has two main problems. One is that it discounts the influence of the systems that are actually causing most of the behavior that you're seeing. It is such a complicated system because there's so many elements to it. It's not just one guy at the top dictating things and then everything else falls from that. It's an interplay between many, many different kinds of things happening, both human and non-human alike. There are natural systems, there are economic systems, there's political systems, and indeed there are political actors that are making decisions which contribute to the kind of behavior that you're seeing. And so someone who believes in this simplistic view of the world will overprivilege the so-called evil person that's behind all of this nastiness and go after them, ignoring all the rest of it. We see a lot of this in the far right, especially in the white supremacist circles with, it's George Soros or Hillary Clinton or the Jews in general that are at fault for all of the world's problems, when clearly that is not the case. In fact, most of the time they're just barking up entirely the wrong tree. The other problem being is that it does hide the things that are actually influencing and allows people to be manipulated very, very easily. If you get somebody like Donald Trump up there saying, oh, it's the Democrats are manipulating everything and they're secret communists and they're trying to take over things, and then you get the QAnon movement picking up on this and adding their own little narrative twists to it, then you end up with what you saw last week. An armed uprising of people with no real political beliefs other than let's overthrow the government and instill our hero, our savior, our Donald Trump. Ugh, I should not have used cat fur for that mustache. With this will to certainty in place, what's basically being built is a mythology, rather than any sort of coherent worldview. This mythology can be very dangerous because it can radicalize people in precisely the wrong direction. What we need is not more irrational narratives of evil versus good, simplistic views of the world. We need to acknowledge that the world is too big to be understood fully, and then proceed to attempt to understand the parts that we can. There are fragments of the world that we can get a sense for. We can start to understand things in analogs and in allegories. I try to use a lot of parables when I'm describing the world, such as, the paperclip maximizer that I shared a couple of days ago. There are functional understandings of the world that don't require a lot of education, don't even require a lot of knowledge or awareness. All it requires is the desire to continue to seek out knowledge, rather than the desire for certainty. All of these conspiracy theories, from Flat Earth to QAnon to anti-vaxxers to all the rest, they've landed on this security of knowing the certain aspect of the world, which forms their entire worldview. They've stopped searching for the truth because they've found something that makes them confident, makes them feel like they have agency in their world by focusing down the complexities of the world into this singular aspect of the world, such as, oh, well, all of the problems are being caused because it's a conspiracy that the world is flat and everybody is trying to be convinced that the world is round. That's a very simple way to understand the problems of the world, which seems very certain. You can frame absolutely everything else about the world in that exact same way, and then you don't have to think about anything else. You don't have to go through the effort of exploring further, learning more about the world, learning more about the rest of the universe, because it simplifies the world down to something that's manageable. It makes that anxiety go away. Even though it may make the anxiety go away, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Doesn't get you any closer to being able to exercise agency. So the folks that land on these things just get more and more aggressive about trying to exercise their agency over the world. And when anything threatens that worldview, they become more and more angry about it because it threatens their sense of agency. As thinking people, we need to be willing to be challenged. We need to be willing to be wrong and change our assumptions, change what we believe when we're confronted with ideas that don't match. And that's what I'm hoping to do here, is to broaden our horizons, to explore the world in ways that we didn't consider before. We tend to get very ossified in terms of our beliefs, especially as we get older. It becomes harder and harder to consider things that are way, way outside of our known quantity of the world. Even if the way that we're living now makes us feel comfortable, there are still things that can be improved upon. We can gain a greater sense of agency by understanding the world better. So we should always be exploring more. For those of you who are watching, I appreciate your desire to learn more. I'm trying to learn more in this process as well, both about myself and about the larger world around, and I want to be able to share that with you. So I've now been doing this for 10 days. It was my New Year's resolution to make a video a day, unscripted, unplanned, and so far I think it's going pretty well. If you're enjoying these videos, I'd encourage you to hit the like button on the video, because it does help this channel move and take off, and I kind of want it to do so. And if you have any friends or family or associates that might enjoy stuff like this, kindly share it with them and maybe spread the word, maybe help us build this movement. Also, subscribe to the channel so that you can be notified of what comes next. I will be publishing, as I say, every single day. So let's keep exploring. Thanks for listening, and see you tomorrow.